The look on my son Mark's face when the museum curator pulled that first 1870s Miller's patent plow plane out of the crate was something I'll carry to my grave. He'd just finished telling the junk hauler to toss all the rusty crop in the bin for $50, not realizing that crop was worth more than his 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. But the real kicker? That wasn't even the most valuable thing in the room. When the curator looked at my 3 children and asked, "Do they know what is inside the false bottom?" the silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I've heard in 40 years. To understand why my own flesh and blood were standing there like deer in headlights, I have to take you back to the day they decided I was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of their inheritance. I spent 45 years as a master carpenter and restoration specialist. I didn't just build houses, I built legacies. I worked 60-hour weeks, my hands permanently stained with walnut dust and linseed oil to ensure Mark, Sarah, and Kevin never wanted for anything. I paid for the Ivy League degrees, the weddings that cost more than my first home, and the seed money for business ventures that inevitably withered on the vine. Through all those years, my sanctuary was my workshop, a custom-built cedar barn behind the main house. Inside was a collection of vintage hand tools I'd spent a lifetime curating. To the untrained eye, it looked like a lot of heavy iron and old wood. To a collector, it was the Smithsonian of woodworking. The first crock in the foundation appeared about 3 years ago, shortly after my wife, Martha, passed away. I was 68, grieving, and perhaps a bit slower than I used to be. My children didn't see a man who needed support. They saw an asset that was depreciating. Mark, who fancies himself a real estate mogul, started making comments about the upkeep of the family estate in Oak Brook. Sarah, whose husband treats her like a trophy, began sending me brochures for active senior living communities that looked suspiciously like high-end prisons. And Kevin just wanted to know if I'd updated my will lately. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. "That rusty junk is a collection of 19th century craftsmanship, Mark," I said quietly. "Some of those pieces are one of a kind." Kevin chuckled, a sound that made my jaw tighten. "Dad, they're old hammers and saws. Nobody uses that stuff anymore. It's garbage. Just let us handle it." That was the moment I realized they didn't see me as their father anymore. They saw me as a bank account with a pulse, sitting on a pile of what they thought was trash. If that had been the end of it, I might have just been hurt. But what they did next was the ultimate betrayal. A week later, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find a massive dumpster in my driveway. Mark and Kevin were in my workshop, throwing my vintage wooden molding planes into the bin like they were scrap lumber. I watched from the doorway as Mark tossed a 1920 Stanley No. 1, a tool worth nearly $2,000 in that condition, into the metal heap. The sound of it hitting the bottom of the dumpster broke something inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just walked back to my car, drove to my lawyer's office, and made a very specific set of phone calls. I spent the next 2 months being the doddering old man they expected. I played along. I told them I was thinking about the nursing home. I watched them walk through my house with measuring tapes, deciding which walls they'd knock down to flip the place once I was moved out. They were so blinded by their own greed, they never noticed I was moving the truly valuable pieces of my collection into a locked, climate-controlled vault at the local museum, replacing them with clever lookalikes I'd picked up for pennies at flea markets. They didn't know the difference between a rare Norris jointer plane and a rusted block of iron from a garage sale. To them, it was all just junk. The escalation reached its peak when I accidentally left a fake appraisal on the kitchen table. It listed the workshop contents as having a negligible value of $500. I saw Mark snap a photo of it when he thought I wasn't looking. He was smirking. He thought he'd hit the jackpot. He could help me by clearing out the junk, claim the loss on some tax form, and get me out of the house faster. What he didn't know was that I'd already invited Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead curator of the National Museum of Industrial History, to come for a private viewing on the same day my children had scheduled their estate cleanout. The day of the reckoning was a Tuesday. The air was crisp and the sun was hitting the cedar barn just right. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, as my 3 children arrived with a local junk hauler they'd hired for $50 and a case of beer. They were in high spirits, laughing about how they were finally cleaning up Dad's mess. "All right, Pops," Mark said, walking up the steps with a smug grin. "Today's the day. We're getting this eyesore cleared out. Don't worry, we'll handle everything.
You just sit there and relax." I smiled at him, a real, genuine smile. "I appreciate your help, Mark, truly. Oh, look, there's another guest." A black sedan pulled into the driveway and Dr. Thorne stepped out, looking every bit the prestigious academic he was. My children looked confused. "Who's the suit?" Kevin whispered. "Just a man interested in history," I said. We all walked down to the workshop. Mark was already directing the junk hauler to start grabbing the heavy crates. "Start with that big wooden chest in the corner," Mark commanded. "It's heavy as lead, probably just full of old scrap iron." Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his eyes widening as he saw the chest. It was my masterpiece, a tool chest inspired by the famous Studley chest, with hundreds of drawers and secret compartments. "Wait," Thorne said, his voice hushed. "Is this the Miller collection?" Mark rolled his eyes. "It's a box of junk, pal. We're tossing it." "Junk?" Thorne turned to Mark, his expression one of pure disbelief. "Sir, if this chest contains what I believe it does, the contents of this room are valued at well over $500,000. This junk is the finest collection of 19th century American edge tools in private hands." The color drained from Sarah's face. Mark's jaw literally dropped. $500,000? He's stammering. He looked at the junk hauler, who was currently holding a rare 1870s plow plane. "Put that down! Put it down right now!" "But you said it was crap," the hauler muttered, looking annoyed.
"I didn't know!" Mark screamed. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and sudden nauseating greed. "Dad, why didn't you tell us? We could have sold this properly. We could have handled the auction." I leaned against my workbench, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt since Martha died. "You told me it was rusty junk, Mark. You told me it was a liability. You were so sure of yourselves." Dr. Thorne was busy examining the chest. He pulled out a drawer, revealing a set of ivory-handled chisels. He looked at me, then back at my children, who were now practically salivating over the tools they had been throwing into a dumpster an hour ago. Then Thorne paused. He ran his hand along the bottom of the main cabinet, clicking a small, nearly invisible brass catch. "Mr. Miller," Thorne said, looking at me with a knowing glint in his eye, "do they know what is inside the false bottom?" The room went deathly silent. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "A false bottom? There's more?" "Is it gold?" Kevin asked, his voice thick with desperation. "Is there money hidden in there?" I nodded to Dr. Thorne. He pulled the hidden panel open. It wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. It was a thick manila envelope and a small leather-bound ledger. "I'll take those," I said, stepping forward. I opened the ledger. "This is a record of every cent I've given the three of you over the last 15 years. The loans for the businesses, the bailouts, the advance on your inheritance you all kept asking for, totaling about $840,000. I then pulled the documents from the envelope. "And this," I said, holding up the papers, "is the deed to this house and the workshop, which I have officially donated to the Museum of Industrial History as a permanent annex. The tools are already legally theirs. I have a life estate, meaning I live here until I pass. And since you three were so concerned about my clutter, I've made sure you won't have to deal with it ever again." "What does that mean?" Sarah shrieked. "It means," I said, my voice calm and steady, "that I've updated my will. Since you've already borrowed more than your fair share of my estate, the remainder of my assets, including the life insurance and the retirement accounts, will be going to the museum's endowment fund. You wanted the junk gone? Well, it's gone, along with the house, the land, and every penny you thought you were going to inherit while I was still warm in my bed." Mark looked like he was going to have a heart attack. "You can't do this. We're your children." "And I was your father," I replied. "But you didn't treat me like one. You treated me like a nuisance. You stood in this shop and threw away my life's work while I was standing right there. You didn't care about the history or the craft or the man who used these tools to put clothes on your backs. You only cared about the price of the dirt the shop was sitting on." I turned to the junk hauler. "Son, here's $100 for your time. Sorry for the confusion. You can leave the dumpster. I'll need it for the rest of their things." "What?" Kevin blinked. "Your mother and I kept a lot of your old things in the attic," I said. "Yearbooks, trophies, old furniture you stored here because you didn't want it in your own homes. It's all junk to me now. You have 1 hour to load it into your cars, or it goes into the bin. Dr. Thorne, would you like to see the rest of the Norris collection in the vault?"
The next hour was a blur of frantic activity and bitter tears. I watched from the porch as my 3 adult children scrambled to save their old sports trophies and high school mementos,
the only inheritance they had left. They tried to argue, they tried to apologize, they even tried to tell me I wasn't in my right mind. But my lawyer was already on his way with the restraining orders to ensure they stayed off the property once their clutter was removed. As Mark drove away, he stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at me. The smugness was gone. The arrogance was replaced by the cold, hard realization that he'd traded a fortune and a father for a $50 junk fee. Now my life is quiet. The museum has turned the barn into a beautiful exhibit, and I spend my afternoons teaching young apprentices how to properly sharpen a plane blade or hand cut a dovetail. My children call me, of course. They call every week, sounding desperate and sweet, asking how I'm feeling and if I've reconsidered the will. I always answer the phone. I'm a polite man, after all. I listen to their stories, I hear about their financial struggles, and I wish them the best of luck. Then I hang up and go back to my workshop. It's funny how life works out. They thought they were cleaning out my junk, but in the end, I was the one who finally got rid of the trash. I've never felt lighter.